this episode 6, The Grandfathers Speak. So if you got to catch the episode yesterday, that was The Grandmother Speak. What was your major takeaway from that, Nikki?
There's just one phrase I love in it, which is Pat McCabe, and she says, "When Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy." And I think that says it all, really.
Very much does, doesn't it? And tonight in The Grandfathers Speak, we're going to see a very different energy, aren't we?
I think the main takeaway, Teo, is remembering. And Drumvlo says that all the tribes that still remember are the Zulu, the Dogon, the Hopi, the Mayans, the Kogi, the Maori, the Polynesians, and the original peoples of Australia, and Aborigines as they like to be known.
Yeah, because when we went to Australia to interview Jagger, do you remember the guy that wears the beautiful kangaroo suit and says, "You spot it, you got it." What a character he was. But he explained to us that by calling Aboriginals, ab is the Latin meaning away from, meaning not. So it's like the Europeans went to Australia and named the people indigenous to that land the not original. So it could not be more offensive.
So let me just cut in there. What I was saying was that all these indigenous tribes that still remember, but we in the West seem to have total memory amnesia. And so Matt McCartney also talks about the ancient tribes of the British Isles, which really have just been wiped out from our mass consciousness. So it's about remembering, getting in touch with, and there's a lot of fantastic information there.
What would you say about the grandmothers and the grandfathers holding different energy within your tribe?
They hold great energies. Now, one is not stronger than the other. It is a balanced gifting into the tribe, so the knowledge that is coming, one has to have the other. So just remember right back to your own grandfather, grandmother, all of them, they were important to allow for you to be able to know what to do and to walk in a good way in this earth walk.
It's that circle, isn't it? Everything goes in a circle, and it's keeping that balance. And that's the tricky bit in life, is keeping the balance. So we have had people asking, well, where do you film these every day? And the answer is in Luna's conservatory, which is why we had that radiator, and people were like, well, can't you cover up the radio? But that's a good idea, thanks for that. So we've covered it up. And the other thing people asked for was a payment plan. So if you want to support the project and invest into the digital or physical package, you're now able to pay for it over 3 months. So it makes the investment more manageable for people on a monthly basis, and you still get to access all of that amazing content. And remember, there is a button further down this page. In fact, I think now above this video, where you can click the green button, and it'll take you to the page where we explain everything you're going to get. There's so much good stuff in there. But now, let's watch The Grandfathers Speak.
In the early 1980s, we heard of a small group of Native Americans moving around Britain visiting our sacred sites. I asked, together with a friend of mine, if they would train us. And so we had this very awkward, at least awkward for me, and challenging experience when they said, "Mac, we understand that you are an educated person." And I was saying, well, you know, I did go to school and been to college, and said, and we expect that in that education you studied history. So I paused a bit. I said, well, I attended lessons. And you could see this sort of question in their eyes and mind, and they turned to me and they said, "Mac, your people were once a tribal people, indigenous to this land. Name your tribes." And I just felt this great flood, really, of a mixture of shame, because I didn't know the name of any single one of our tribes, excitement that we were once a tribal people, the whole range of different emotions just moving through me. I became quite tearful. And then after a while, long, very embarrassed silence, one of them stood up and said, "Coritani, Ordovici, Brigantes, Silures, Dumnonii, Atribates, Trinovantes." Basically, that began a whole journey of a very wonderful, deep journey into trying to unlayer, to discover the roots of the people from whom I and many others have come from, our grandfathers and grandmothers, and the whole idea that we were once an earth-honouring people.
Creator, heart of the sky, Mother Earth, heart of our existence here, from this high lake in Peru, the sacred lake of Titicaca, I pray that you help us to be humble. I pray that you help us to make space within us for you to flow through us, so that you are reflected in the way we walk, so that we never forget that the air is your blessing and that it is alive, so we don't forget that the water is the water of life, so that we don't forget our tree nations and that they're alive. We don't forget all the animals of the water, of the land, of the air. We don't forget that the rocks are alive. And more than anything, that we don't forget that we need to love each other and love everything, because one is all and all is one.
Te aroha, te whakapono, te rangi maari e love, hope, peace.
As at this particular time everything is getting so difficult and the message is constantly coming to us that the world is changing and things are in a dire state and so on, what we need more than ever is to connect with the dimension, the level of meaning, the level of spirit, the level of purpose. And spiritual teachings, spiritual teachers, and spiritual ceremonies are all doorways, they're all portals, they're all ways that open us to a deeper level.
And with this change that is coming, we now are preparing for that, in feeling that we are the examples, and having to walk that example in a profound way of heart integrity. But we are still in that two-legged form. These times of the new sun, the times that are going to allow for us to be in this new transformed place, seeing the beauty of what is being birthed into this, the two-leggeds now, is powerful. And we have the opportunity to experience that, feel that, and know that words aren't necessary. Allow for the frequencies to connect with you. As you do so, you will understand more and more and be given the opportunity and the blessings to be a part of this new sun time.
My destiny is to be of service to God and mankind. That is the destiny. I have no other name for myself other than Mātua, and I'm a vessel. I'm no shaman, I'm no guru, I'm none of those flash words that belongs to the guns. Mine is, I'm just a vessel of service.
I met with Aborigines from Australia, from other different countries. It's very clear how we know now and how around the world understand something is happening in this planet, and we need to do something for help the planets where we live.
It isn't a matter of maybe it's a better idea or something. We absolutely have to combine with the elders, with the ancient ones. Otherwise, we won't know how to move into the future in a harmonic way so that we can be stabilized and live there. It's essential.
We were abused, we were traumatized, we took it deep inside ourselves, and later, as our nation grew to its more current form, we exported that trauma all around the world and meted out almost to all corners of this earth what was done to us. And in many ways, again, this is the frightening thing, you see, it's still happening. It's in different ways. But this is a mindset, a way of being that is actually full of pain and sorrow and regret and anger, and it is nihilistic in the end because it is actually the behavior of something that is no longer sure that it wishes to live. And so gradually our actions dismantle the very systems upon which we depend.
Well, how do we get beyond all the lies and the untruths that have been told in the world and all the deception and everything else that's been going on? Well, first of all, you can't use that method. You can't go to war. That does not work. There is only one spirit that moves through all life. Only one. And sacred geometry proves that. You can see that that same image is everywhere. Whoever created this universe was one consciousness, and we can't use that kind of thing. We can't fight. That's not how we do it. We do it by going within ourselves and connecting directly to Great Spirit and to the energies of Mother Earth and Father Sky and to live what the truth is, and then begin the dreaming process. It is the dreaming process that will change the world. This is this is how it began, and this is how it will end.
Nobody can break through your reality. You have to break through it yourself. Okay? What I would say to them is to stop, even for a moment in a day, in a silent place, in a dark place. And to be dark, you only need to close your eyes and stop and listen to your heartbeat and make room for the Spirit. Okay? And by that I mean, don't pray to who you think God is, and don't make room for a preconceived notion. Do it in silence, in a humble way. Open yourself, and listen to the manifestations of Creator. Listen to the wind. Listen to the water. Feel the warmth of the sun and touch Mother Earth, even for a moment, because that's the first step.
These were considered very sacred lands, these islands of ours. And that I think was one of the things that those Native Americans said to me in the early on that really shook me to the core. They said, any young person of your generation, as I at that time was young, they said, you who has not found a home in whatever traditional, religious, spiritual practice has been offered in your country, they always look to the horizon, mostly towards the east. So they go to India, they go to Tibet, they go to Nepal, they go to, and then they began to list, everywhere around the world. And the only place that they never, ever even consider, as it were, is right under their feet.
It is said that a true keeper of the story must never seek glory, must never seek power. He must save the power of good
and try to stand aside and not allow himself to get swallowed up in the madness of power lust.
You know, the people of south of the United States border, they're not poor just because they're poor. They're poor as a result of repressive policies that have been in effect since 1492 to make sure that the quote-unquote status quo maintained a position of dominance. So you put that together with the fantasies that are put out to feed and develop and maintain materialism, and the illusion that it creates in the youth. So the youth wants to be like that. They think that that's the reality to aspire to. So there are many hidden things in there to make sure that the people are kept within the area that they're kept, so they can continue to pilfer our riches and hide our sacred sites from us, so that when the time comes, they can be in them instead of us.
In this period of the sixth sun, we've given time, with the support of each other, to go back to start to remember.
I was just with the Maori and the Waitaha, which are older than the Maori. The Waitaha, you ask them where they came from, and they know. They said, we came from Lemuria. And the elders can remember their ancestors going back 60,000 years. They can name them. My mother and father's, my grandmother, all the way back 60,000 years. Take a long time. And if you look in their temples, you go inside and you look at their temple walls, you see them where they had webbed hands and webbed feet, because in Lemuria, they say that who created them was the dolphins and the whales. And I agree with that. That's who created all of humanity. And they used to swim with them. They were in the water more than they were on land. That's why their hands, they never developed gills, because they did go on land.
Our culture it's been endlessly portrayed as being, primitive and nothing, but we were in this country was the epicenter of the knowledge around metals. And in those days, forging and all the creation of metal was considered to be a deep science that was imbued with mystery and sacredness. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that actually we were very proficient in the building of our roads and all kinds of other things. There were so many aspects of what we would consider to be civilized people that we had prior to this invasion, and in many ways it was dumbed down by that extraordinary power.
They've managed to stay alive. I don't know how they did it. They still remember the dreaming process from the heart and how it creates everything, and they're still there, and yet they'll accept anyone into their tribes, and if you wish to be initiated, they keep absorbing. Their children are told that we have to remember not only the past, but we have to know the present and what's going on in all the levels of life. So when they get to be 14, 15 years old, they send them out. They have to leave the island of New Zealand, and they go out in the world, and they can't come back until they've been called back. And so they go out, and most of them go out and study other spiritual religions, and they get to know all these different. They understand the world. They get the world on various levels, and then they come back and they integrate that into their tribe.
Now, it seems to me that what we're maturing into, particularly in the last few years, is a kind of middle way of realizing that respect for spiritual teachers and elders is important, that respect for tradition is important, but also understanding that we can find our own authority within, and that we need to also allow ourselves to be spontaneous and to discover the new.
For me, what does it mean to be indigenous? I say, you know, wherever you somehow, in a specific way, wherever you set up home, plant your garden, as it were, educate your children, and you say, this is where, then I think that my feeling is the earth welcomes you. You come with good heart, you're wrapped in that, and you become on your journey to deep relationship with that piece of land, to the point where, like the French director of a big multinational who had terminal cancer and was going to die, and I met with him and I asked him about what he loved, and he said, I love my farm in France. And I said, what is it about that farm in France? He said, you could bring me a handful of the soil from that farm and I would recognize it. He said, it is the very essence for me of home and connection.
We're all equal under the Creator. That we don't cause any harm, no loss, no damage. We don't impose our will on others, which is the fundamental law. It's universal law. We're going to come to the fore. We're going to rise up and take our place. But we're not doing it just for our tribe. We're doing it for collectively everyone on this planet.
The indigenous people have always recognized that the earth is alive. And when they did ceremony and projected this honor and projected this ritual done in an appropriate fashion to the earth responds. The earth recognizes it and responds. So when you're in a sacred site, when you're in a powerful frequency, whatever you put out comes back tenfold.
Some people call them crystal ley lines, but they're not necessarily crystal ley lines. They're energetic lines that can be created at will as well. I was at the Dreaming Festival in Australia, which is incredible festival for Aboriginal people, showing the whole range of contemporary Aboriginal Australia, from the ancient right through to the most modern. And sitting in the corner of a cafe were a few elders from the Northern Territory, and I was talking with another elder from Northern Territory, and he said, see those old men over there? He said, they're creating a song line right now between this site and the Northern Territory. And I went, wow. I don't know how to do that yet. But so it's obviously not a crystal ley line if they can create one through intention, yeah. So with intention, you can create an energetic line between one spot and another, so that it's like a communication highway. You can sing along that line, and when you sing along that line, people hear you long distance. Now there's a song line that runs from Adelaide up through Wilpena Pound, up through Uluru, through the Kimberleys in Western Australia, and all the way to Tibet in the Tapala Palace. And all along that song line, they've got similar words that mean the same thing.
The role of a shaman in the old cultures was to keep the group, the people, the tribe in spirit, inspired, connected, and walking a good red road in peace and harmony as far as humanly possible. The role of the shaman was also to tune into where, if it was hunter-gatherer, where the animals were, where the game was, and where would be a good place, for example, to pitch camp for winter, where to move on in the spring, and so on. This has been done by our ancestors in healthy cultures all over the world for maybe hundreds of thousands of years. It just depends. It's a matter of how far humanity really goes back, which is so much further than most of us
most of common thinking accepts. It's a major part of the ancient cultures. I recently went to Botswana and experienced the Kalahari Bushmen in their ancient dances. Wonderful. And the extraordinary trance-inducing music. In Morocco, I danced with the Ganawas, who again make most marvelous trance-inducing music with very simple instruments, and yet it's incredible music. These wonderful ancient ways are available for us, and some of us over here, we're learning them and practicing with them and teaching them and so on. And this is where the rave culture tries to go, but drugs mixed with alcohol, it's insane. It's insane. And certainly that music certainly works for some people, the mechanical music, but again, where's the spirit in the mechanical music? The drum has a spirit. It's had a spirit for 100,000 years. That brings through spirit. The rave culture is a wonderful effort to get in touch with spirituality, but it's misguided. And at least take the alcohol out of it, if nothing else.
When you look at the word druid, it comes from two syllables. Dru, that is variously described as coming from words for the oak tree, or possibly steadfast or strong, and id, from which we get the English word witness, for instance, and which stems from an old Sanskrit root meaning knowledge. And so you have, in the druid, you have the idea of the forest sage, knowledge of the oak, knowledge which, if you extend it, it means knowledge of the wild, wild wisdom. Because when I connect with the wild in my heart and with my body and in my mind, it fills me with life and with energy and with a kind of primal connection to the world.
The Druids, who were the priests, they were intellectuals, they were healers, they were academics, they were politicians, so we don't have an equivalent now, I think, that they were all wrapped into this one thing, which made them extremely dangerous, because they were very well educated. I mean, according to the records held in Ireland, a 20-year training to become a Druid. So it appears that they were a mystery school. They were probing the secrets of the universe. I believe they were scientists. They were, after all, these people came after those who had developed such sophistication in the measurement of time and space and the design of such places as Stonehenge, even though they were long since disused at this period of history. They were a library, a repository of hundreds, if not thousands of years' worth of knowledge, and all of it passed on orally. So the discipline we can imagine that these people exerted and that was obliged of those that were in training is tremendous.
My community is the same my house, and I'm no agree when someone arrive in my community and offering money, offering many things, only offering, but they don't do how they say. And so always we said we are going to protect our rainforest, because it's the place where we live, the connection with the mother nature, the connection with the plant, with the birds, animals. That's how we live with our ancestors' spirit. So when they arrive there, it's cutting our blood. It's the same. They are cutting our blood, our spirit, our cosmovision.
2,000 years ago, your land was the Tibet of today. To this land, people travelled hundreds or even thousands of miles to come to pray in this land. You know, your forests, as it were, were honoured and loved and prayed with. Ceremonies were held with your waters. The land was believed to be just pulsing with a deep magic.
What is startling is the ones that are really tuned in and have the quality of elderhood in heaven knows, early 20s or something. And that's wonderful to see, because it means amongst the younger generation are some people whose hearts are intact, whose spirit is present in them, and who can be leaders.
So at the age of 8, I attended one of my uncle's ceremonies, and there, when the lights went out and he was praying, and he was commanding things, and I was sitting right there in front of the altar. So I leaned over and I listened, and he was communicating with someone. And when he would command them to show themselves, there would be flickers of spark all over. And basically, my interest in doing that started then. For 5 years, I've attended ceremonies. I prayed on my own. And at one point, during Chanupa ceremony that my father was doing, all of a sudden I could feel like a magnetic, my hairs on my face they stood on end, and I heard this whistling. And I knew I heard it before, so I told my father, I said, hey, this is going on. And he said, the first thing is you have to go on a hill.
I was invited by a gentleman I went to college with about 15 years ago to go to a sweat, a sacred Inipi ceremony that's also at Temescal, a 4,000-year-old ceremony. And from the moment I did that Temescal and felt the heat, and I had to humble myself and drop to the earth, and I felt the cooling of the earth and the nurturing of Mother Earth, I understood that that's what I was made of. I understood that that's where the lessons came from. And I realized that those National Geographic pictures where you'd see the Aborigines all covered in earth, and before I thought, hey, look at those guys, they're all muddy, I realized that they were covering themselves in Mother Earth because they needed to be nurtured. They needed to be comforted. And I realized that I was praying in the manner in which man and women were meant to pray and to relate with Creator.
I recall the childhood that I had, and I can't help comparing it to the childhoods of many children, the children I see around me, and I find that deeply sad. We were I would say we were let out of doors. We were pushed out of doors early in the morning, and it was it was expected that we would then just go wild, you know, and if we didn't show up until the end of the day, that was fine. And we fought battles, we tunneled, we melted, we created little forges, we made bows that were absolutely lethal. We got cut and grazed and bruised and broke the odd bone and things like this. And somebody mentioned recently if my parents had ever allowed us to do what we did then, now, they would have been caught. And I guess it's true, but the joy of it, the empowering effect of our children being rubbed with soil and grass and understanding the seasons and having a little fire at night and cooking food and our imaginations being able to go wild and crazy with all the possibilities of which were so linked with learning to love the smell of earth, of leaves in autumn, of bluebells when they come up in spring. I think it's tragic. I think it is tragic because we cannot grow up without risk, and there is risk in the childhood I was describing. There was risk, physical risk, emotional risk. There was every kind of risk, and that helped us discover who we are. But now it's as if we have become so frightened of everything that is outside of the living room, everything that exists in the sort of in the world that we can't control, and it's hopeless because you cannot control, and so ultimately our kids become imprisoned, and I think go a little bit crazy.
So, I was fortunate to find my teacher, Uncle Phil Crazybo. And after the proper ceremonies and I'd learned the things that he asked me, he came to my home and he put up a sweat lodge. And he appointed me the caretaker. And we've been doing ceremonies for people in the city. And in the city, and it's one of the largest cities in the world. I live in the Los Angeles metropolis. And it's different than here. Here, we see few cars. We hear no industrial machinery. There aren't even that many wires that are giving feedback and interfering with our thoughts. And there aren't too many television stations to distract us and to steer our attention away from ourselves and away from the spirit. And it's also kind of unique because there are a lot of indigenous people there, both from North America and more from the border south. Many Mexicans, many Central Americans, many South Americans who have no way of connecting with their culture and their spirit. They carry it in their heart, but the distractions of those places every day takes them further and further and further away. And they're almost like a forgotten people because the people from where they're from don't really know where they're at and the struggles that they're going through just to be there, to find a better way of living so that the people that they have left behind can live in a more comfortable way.
A lot of people ask me, well, are you Lakota? No, I'm not Lakota. I'm just a white person. But I was given the spirit name Hohusha, and that means red bone. And one of the meanings is that you are white, but you think like an Indian. So after 30 years, my thinking is along that line, and I guess in that sense I'm a secret weapon for them because I really look white, but on the inside I think pretty much like a traditional Lakota. And this came with time. You know, when I began, I was a field anthropologist, and you don't get into these ceremonies or these ways without spirit consent.
And if you have any doubt about your place in the world, remember the world, God, creation, has given birth to you. Creation has given birth to you because creation needs you. You are a living part of creation. You are not an unwanted child or an accident or anything like that. You are an essential part of creation with a responsibility with everybody else for the furtherance of creation in a good way.
Well, he left me there, and it was like on the third day of my vision quest, and it was during the evening time. I heard what sounded like gruntings of pigs, and they were coming in all directions. And I remember my father saying, whatever you do, don't let go of the chanupa. You hang on to it with your dear life. So that's what I did, because I knew these things were coming, and I knew they were coming. And so I just bent over with the chanupa, and I held it as tight as I can, and I started praying, hey, don't hurt me, And here as they came closer, I recognized the sound of buffaloes. And they surrounded where I was. And then all of a sudden, right on the top of my head, one snorted. And then I heard a voice say, hey, we're your friends, and you could be our friend. And we know your intentions. We've seen. They said to me, you could be our friend, and you could be our spokesperson. But first, tell us that everything that comes through ceremony isn't yours. And I said, yes, everything that comes through ceremony isn't mine. I didn't know at the time what that meant until I started doing ceremonies. And then the gifts came, the cars came, everything that man could ever want came. But it wasn't mine. So I received it and I gave it away. And people wondered about that. And people were hurt by it because they said, I gave that to you as a gift. Why did you give it away? Well, it was the deal that I made because it came through ceremony. And that's the way that it's been.
Why do we ridicule almost all efforts that are focused towards the rediscovery of mystery and wonder? All of those people who are inquiring into esoteric lines of knowledge, different ways of discovering spirituality and things. But I think it's endemic in the whole society. So we even had a situation where to describe a child as very imaginative was to basically say that they were, failing at school, as it were. I think we are just frightened. We're just frightened of everything that somehow moves outside of this incredibly tight, controlled, rigid little box of what is acceptable.
We are spiritual teachers here to this land, and we have a job to do And so I've been doing ceremonies since the age of 13. And I will still be doing ceremony until the Great Spirit, takes his sacred breath of life back.
And I remember Godfrey saying to me, sitting out the back from the ceremony, and we sat there at like 4 in the morning, and there was a shooting star. And we're sitting there, and we just both got our arms crossed. And Godfrey's sitting there, and it's just dead silent. And I said, Godfrey. And he said, uh-huh. I said, we're the aliens, aren't we? We just forgot. And Godfrey goes, uh-huh. And that was all he needed to say. It was quite, it was an interesting, precious little moment.
I had been to Australia, ironically. Top of my game, was given an internship at an international design firm down there, just doing really great work, and really got into a dark spot, really bad. And the easiest way to explain it is depression. It was just a cyclical negativity, a void that wouldn't allow me to function. They found a small lesion on my brain. That's the only thing that they could find physically. I was introduced to Godfrey. I went up to South Dakota, and we did a 5-stick ceremony to find out what I needed. And then the following night, did a Whippy ceremony, a healing ceremony. And that was not the first time that I had done Native American ceremony, but it absolutely was the first time where I had been in a true shamanic ceremony like that, where the spirits come in and literally perform miracles. For me, what happens is it brings everything down again to that singular focus, and you essentially have to transcend your mind, because your mind is freaking out. Your mind thinks you're going to die. Your mind is like, oh my God, it's so hot, and gets louder and louder and louder. And so it's a perfect tool for you then to remember and go, wait a minute, and to pray and to get really humble and to literally kiss the dirt and pray that you will be okay, and start groveling right there on Mother Earth. And when you do that, then that mind stops, because something else starts to happen, because that appreciation starts coming in, and that beauty starts pouring in, and that remembrance that we all get when we practice our different forms of transcendence.
I started this foundation targeting just the children. I wanted to be a spiritual learning center for all children, no matter what race they are. We want to be able to let them know, hey, there's a spiritual path here, and to teach them fully about what we know about spirituality. So, but all we can do is to help someone on the hill, to take him to that door and put his hand on that doorknob, but for him to open it and enter is entirely up to him. And this foundation will help all people.
The prayer is really a thanks, and that deep thank you for all of the blessings that we have and everything that we're continually given, and the continual support That's real prayer. And that comes from a very deep place inside of each human being. Many teachers talk about the many different roads to that, right? But that's prayer. And then certainly when you need things and when we need help and you pray that way from that place, then again, it works.
So we've got this, what is it, a balancing act, this creative act to do, to on the one hand respect tradition, on the one hand learn from teachers, learn from the old teachings, learn from the scriptures, to respect them, but also at the same time to be open to the Spirit so that we can allow that Spirit to work through us, and so that these old ways can manifest in new ways in the new world.
So we believe in this new cycle is very important to change our dreams, because at night we had the dreams of surviving here. Other people has the dreams of to have things, you know, but now we need to have a new dream, and we have to work with our children.
I don't believe that the origins of the children's fire is known to anyone, but it's a memory thread. But basically it was leaders, chiefs of a people saying, how can we ensure that the output, the choices, the decisions made by our leaders will protect those things that we love? And so I guess there was then this whole sort of consideration of, well, what is it? What is it that we really love? And that became embodied in this concept of the children. So the idea then emerged that every time the chief sat in council, a little fire would be lit at the centre of the council, called the children's fire, and every chief would have to make a pledge to the children's fire. No law, no decision, no action, nothing of any kind will be permitted to go out from this council that will harm the children.
So as long as those nations pray to the white God that was imposed on them, they're not going to find themselves. They're going to continue to carry that yoke of guilt, that yoke that says that existence had a beginning and existence will be an end, and the yoke that is maintained by the prospect of a life after, rather than the life of the moment. And once we live in the moment and we make a connection through the earth to Creator, everything will be changed, because that's when you learn the humility that you need to forgive.
We live all the time within a them and us story. And so for a long time I lived in the story that said that anybody working in such organizations, as it were, was the enemy and was definitely an us, a them. And I, at a certain period of time, I realized that that was untrue and unfair, and that actually these people are remarkably similar to myself. So then it just became, but nonetheless they are immensely powerful in the influence they wield. So then I thought I have to do everything I can, along of course with many others who are trying to do similar things, but to humanize these organizations, that they serve the best interests of the children's fire. Ultimately, I have to say, do these huge corporations have a place in our future? It's a much more local world that I'm rather fond of, but I feel that goes. The fact is, we do have them, and we will have them for at least the duration of my life, so that's what I'll focus on.
Many teachers, many elders, many students, they start to be more aware, and they start to share in different places in the world. And we believe that this is part of all this activation, this reactivation, this real awakening.
What led me to bringing the Children's Fire pledge to large multinationals and large business organizations in truth, to begin, actually its origin is that I was instructed to do so. I was told, you know, you do actually have the education and the means to live in more than one world. You can step from our world into that world. And because you can do it, and there are not that many people who can do it, you need to do it. So I was informed and instructed that that was what I needed to do.
I'm a humble man, you know. I step back, and I'm not who you hear. It's Creator. But people sometimes ask me, how'd you come to be so smart? And I always tell them, I made a lot of mistakes, and I tried to fix all of them. And I know so many things because I've made so many mistakes.
The way in which I'm received by many of these large, the audiences drawn from large organizations is, I would say, mostly overwhelmingly positive. And it's wonderful to witness. Sometimes it's quite dramatic. In one organization whose name I won't embarrass them by naming it, but we had, the place was deluged in tears. The grief that rose during that occasion was such that we had to stop the event while everybody gathered themselves before we could continue. But on a very, you know, I mean, in this last few weeks, I will have done 3 more talks to corporate audiences. And my expectation is that most of those people in those audiences will resonate with what I'm saying. The challenge is that we are trained to believe that we have no power or influence or capacity to make change. And so we always come back with this question of who me, you know, who me? But everybody says that, and you know, and of course it's just really a way of avoiding taking responsibility.
So when we pray and when we do ceremonies, we don't really pray for ourselves, and we don't really pray for today because the day's happening. We pray for our children, our children's children, their children's children, their children's children, their children's children, 7 generations back.
May it be our weeping can begin. May it be that these ancient mountains of knowledge will march back into our hearts, and our chests will burst open and become the frothy ocean waves, and where the little boats of each one's hope and longing will be shipwrecked on that same shore, but will never need to be rescued because we will sit by the same fire. Come sit by my fire, invite me to yours, let's go home. We could say many words like that, and we should talk to each other like that. I hope to meet you in that green field someday. And if I don't, I hope my grandchildren meet yours. And I hope that big party happens.
The medicine wheel for us represents the gathering of all races, the gathering of all cultures just in one circle of love, the gathering of all the sacred 4 races. Because, first of all, we are human beings, and then I am an Inca, and so on. So right now we need to see the things that we have in common. It's our love, our heart. So we need to focus on that. That's the connection of the medicine. As an indigenous person and a person from the city, I love you, no matter who you are, and if I've not seen you or whether I haven't seen you, because we come from the same Mother Earth, from the same Father, Son, and from the same Creator.
Today, human beings give their lives to save whales. Today, human beings will fight you if they see you wantonly destroying trees anywhere on earth. What is the meaning of all this? In my younger days, the word environment was not there in our school books. In my younger days, the word conservation was not there in the books that I read. But today, these are sacred words, words on the lips of even the ordinariest of ordinary men and women. Everybody is suddenly aware of the fact that the earth is alive, that the oceans are alive and should be kept alive, that the skies should not be polluted by global warming and by fossil fuel fumes. For the first time, human beings who were bloody-handed monsters before are today humble gods before the all highest. We human beings are becoming saviors where we were destroyers before. This is the greatest hope that I see for the human race everywhere. This is the greatest hope for us, the children of the great Earth Mother.
So in the early 90s, my company, we got a new client. New client says, we believe that we're going to make a commercial fortune. And at the moment we're a tiny little company, but we are convinced this is going to be a massive success. When the day comes that we achieve that success, we would like to be able to put our hand on our hearts and say we did it with our values intact, with integrity. Would you work with us to try to enable this to become true? So it was a wonderful dream project. So I said yes, and together with my colleagues we worked with them for 5 years, and they sold the company to Warren Buffett and made an enormous amount of money, I don't know how much. And they then came to me and said, actually, Mac, the two founders, we feel a bit empty about all this because we're now very wealthy, but actually we were moderately wealthy before, and what do we do next? Just try and become even more wealthy, and so or feels a bit predictable and a little bit pointless. Would you do something with us? Would you work with us around the questions of meaning and purpose? So that's the time when I first revealed to them the fact that in my parallel life was working with these Native Americans. And we went off to Snowdonia, did a ceremony, and at the end of that I was called into the office, and he said, "Do you have a dream?" And I described this valley where we would inquire what it means to be human and try and inspire people to take action for a better world. And he said, well, "Do you need anything?" And I said, "Yes, I need the valley." And he wrote the check that bought 50 acres of Devon and said, "Well, now you can do it." The impact on me, I mean, that was 22 years ago. The impact rolls on.
These things need to be lived. They need to be walked. You can't dream something and then do something opposite. It has to be in alignment. So dreaming is in alignment with action, which is in alignment with thought, which is in alignment with your emotions, which is in alignment with the great creative plan. And as soon as you get your life force in behind the creative plan, which is life, which is abundance, then the whole universe conspires to make it so.
My message for the world is we need to raise our consciousness. We need to walk with our eyes open, with our understanding, because the technology is affecting all the people.
These prophetesses said that towards the end of time, before the coming of the next flood, human beings shall become like gods. Human beings shall do too late the work for which they were originally created as protectors and protectresses of the earth that gave us birth.
Generosity, gratitude, appreciation, as active principles within a life, I think are just some of the most wonderful, wonderful things. Engender feelings of tenderness and lovingness and at the heart, really, of what it is to love.
Oh, I think everything is working so beautifully. And we're just part of the prophecy. It's biblical. It's like a race. They seem to be winning the race, and of course they are winning the race all the time, but this race, they ain't gonna win this one. Because it says, the first will be last, and the last shall be first. There's a swing of the pendulum. There's going to be that change.
Let me go to yours. You come to mine. Let us put together this old tapestry. Let's make it holy again. As the rock and roll star said, "Lord, please make me holy again." Let our weeping begin and our laughter. Let's plant the forest. This is the age of restoration. Holy men and holy women, loving the earth. Weeping, laughing, smiling, loving, in a totally inefficient way.
So, so much wisdom in there. What was your takeaway?
The importance that we must allow for the heart to remember. Every single two-legged that is walking on this Mother Earth is connected to the ancestry. So we need to begin to start with ourselves, knowing that with beginning here, we begin to understand the teachings of the grandfathers. The way they spoke, the diversity, very powerful.
Super. I mean, just and what's so amazing is because we spent so long putting these together, and then when you launch them online, you've got no idea what feedbacks can be received. And the Facebook page, every day, the comments, the way they say, people are saying, I think I put it in yesterday's email that you haven't just created a movie series, you're creating a movement. And it's just so gratifying to hear. So thank you for all those beautiful, beautiful comments.